listeners, and welcome to the Be the Ultimate Assistant podcast with Bonnie and Vicki. I'm Vicki Sokol-Evans.
And I'm BonnieLow-Kramen. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, Bon. So these next two episodes, part 1 and part 2, is all about finding your dream job in 2016. And I want to make a point to our listeners, if I may, that we typically don't really mention the date and time, what time of year or the season on these episodes, because we want these to be kind of evergreen, that you can listen to these month after month and year after year and not feel like it's very dated. But given the economic climate and that it changes, the job market changes, we are going to be mentioning 2016. It's currently December 2015, and we're talking about dream jobs, and we both are living our dream now, and we both had our dream jobs. And let's start off with you, like, telling our listeners about your dream job and kind of where you are now, and that kind of will set the pace for the next 2 episodes. What do you think about that?
That sounds awesome, and we're so honored to have a great guest here today to talk about it. But we hear that term a lot, dream job. And looking back and in prep for today's podcast, I was thinking about our dream jobs, Vic. And specifically, looking back, and I worked with Olympia Dukakis, the Oscar-winning actress, for 25 years. And it certainly turned out to be my dream job. But when I started, I had no idea that it was my dream job. I didn't take it for the money. I didn't take it for the stature at all, because at the beginning, Olympia wasn't an Oscar winner when I first went to work for her, but it developed into my dream job. And I took it for the learning opportunity. So there are so many lessons about this in terms of seeking your dream job, is that what you think you might be looking for may not necessarily turn out like that. And then, of course, 4 years ago, I resigned from that dream job to take a new dream job, and that is to travel the world with you, Vicki, and teaching and speaking. And again, I didn't know it was going to turn out to be this way. So these dream jobs take twists and turns, and it's a complicated subject. So that's how I wanted to begin. And by the way, every job ends sometime, even dream jobs. So with that, Vicki, I want to turn it back to you, and you'll introduce our guest, please.
That's a good point. Because, we talk to assistants all over the world and wanting to pursue their dream job, and sometimes when they go through a workshop, they realize they are in their dream job. Mm-hmm. And so that's always great to see. And the fact that dream jobs end and you're on to the next dream job, that's a really good point. So I'm looking forward to these next 2 episodes. And before I introduce our guest today, our awesome guest, I want to define a few things for everybody. First of all, we're going to talk about, we hear the term PA and EA. PA stands for personal assistant, and EA stands for executive assistant. And for the purposes of these next 2 episodes and saving time, we're going to refer to any one of those roles as the assistant. If you want more information about the difference in those terms, we're going to include a link to Lucy Brazier's interview that we had with her, so that you can, because it's how many terms, how many definitions of assistants are there, Bon? Do you remember?
I'm pretty sure she said there was 162 different titles around the world for this role.
For this role as the assistant. So
yeah.
We're going to be saying assistant, meaning any type of an assistant type position, any one of the 162 roles. So we'll be sure to include a link to Lucy's episode. Secondly, there's the term resume and curriculum vitae, or CV. So we hear those terms a lot based on where you are geographically, and our guest Chris Taylor is going to be diving in deeper to define what those 2 types of documents are, especially those. Everyone needs either a resume or a CV or both, depending on where you are. So for the purpose of these next 2 episodes, we're going to be using the term resume, which includes the CV. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our guest. I'm so excited. Christopher Taylor is our guest today, and he is the founder and managing director of CTA, Chris Taylor Associates, a London-based boutique and private recruitment service matching most senior and talented executive and personal assistants with today's business leaders. Before the business was launched, Christopher spent 6 years getting to know the attributes, characteristics, and skills of the world's best executive and personal assistants in order to offer the finest recruitment service for both clients and candidates. Christopher is also the founder of Number 42, the world's first private members club for senior executive assistants. And Bonnie had the honor and privilege of speaking to the group in November, which was really exciting. And Chris was also our guest at our most recent BTUA 2-day workshop in London, and our students loved learning from you, Chris. So with that, I want to welcome our guest, Christopher Taylor. Hi, Chris.
Good morning to you both. How are you?
Great,
great. Good. So happy you're here. So great to hear all of our accents together. I love this.
Good morning, both of you. What a privilege to be here. So can't wait.
Oh, good, good. Well, let me start off with an obvious question. You're based in London, as I just mentioned, and our listeners are all over the world. Will these next 2 episodes relate to candidates everywhere? Can you kind of give us some perspective of your background and what you do?
Yes, very much so. Yes, I mean, I think what I'm going to talk about will be for all territories, whether you're in Europe or the US or in Asia, makes no difference. I think that the hints and the tips and the advice that I'm giving, as I say, will apply to everybody. Yeah, I mean, the business has been going now for, 18 months, and it's been a real learning curve for me. I did spend, as you say, a long time talking to and learning from, I think that's the key word, learning from executive assistants, personal assistants, before I set this business up. And what I wanted to do was create something which I felt represented the best in the profession, because I didn't really think that existed. So I'm delighted to be working with so many, many wonderful people. And I continue to be astounded by quite how brilliant they are. So yes, delighted.
Amazing. Good, good, good. So we wanted to make sure that everyone, regardless of where you are in the world, Chris is someone you definitely want to learn from. So we're so excited. And so what do you think most people don't know about the recruitment process and/or recruiters?
I think probably looking at the recruiter, I think it's the diverse nature of the role that I have. I'm a confidant, I'm a friend, I'm a trusted advisor, I'm a therapist at times, I'm a coach, I'm a career counselor, and I think that all of those things are so important for people to recognize that that's the role of a good recruiter. That's what you should see. It isn't just me sending resumes to various clients and hoping to get a candidate an interview. It's much more of a holistic service, and I think the majority of my time really is spent probably being a coach and a therapist to probably 150 people a month. So it's in a very diverse role. I think the other thing about recruiters is that I think a lot of assistants assume that a recruiter has a magic wand and they can find them a perfect or a dream job. That isn't really the case. I think a lot of research, particularly published in the US and in Europe, suggests that most assistants or most people, on whatever business that they do, whatever their role is, their job, actually finds a job without using a recruitment service. So I would like to say to everybody, on a global basis, that we don't have a magic wand as a recruitment service. But what we do is, I hope, is that we provide a holistic approach to finding a dream job.
So you kind of sound like a matchmaker a
Very
little
much
bit.
so. Cupid.
I mean, yeah, Cupid. Hopefully you're not trying to, people don't fall in love because of your services.
No.
Maybe they do.
I'm not shooting arrows.
They fall in love with the work and the job, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very much it. It is a matchmaking service. So it is bringing together the client, so the organization, usually a company, but not always a company. It could be a charity, it could be, a government agency, but bringing that person together with the best assistant for that role. So it is a matchmaking service. So it is really understanding people's motivations for wanting to change jobs, or people's motivations for their career development, and actually where they like to see themselves in a few years' time. So it is, you're right, it's very much putting together that marriage. And not every marriage, of course, lasts. But I think that the amount of time and effort that we spend with each role that we have, I think our success rate is pretty good.
Wow. One of the statistics I've heard recently, and this is global, is that only 35% of all new jobs are gotten through recruitment. So
Yes.
and it's mainly the other 65, it's through networking and it's your people. It's all about relationships and people. But given that, Chris, you've been studying this for 6 years. We're about to head into 2016, a new year. What's the landscape as you see it in the job market?
Bonnie, it's so competitive at the moment. I think in terms of skills, the people that we are seeing now that are coming through with, excellent college degrees, multiple languages, have worked in overseas and has, lots of cultural influences. I think the amount of men that are coming into the industry is very interesting, considering that it used to be, or until recently, it was a female-dominated business, which it still is, of course. But the amount of men coming through, and very good men, I hasten to add, brilliant. I think how international it is, Bonnie. We can put a role, we can advertise a role online, and we can get resumes from assistants that are in South Africa, the United States, Spain, Hong Kong. It's how international the job market now is, and how willing people are to relocate to a different country. I think that didn't happen 20 years ago. I don't think that happened 10 years ago. So I think that's a recent phenomenon. Technology, I think the requirements, I think technology is completely changing the way that assistants are operating today. Again, business is very global, it's very 24 hours, and I think that's had a real impact on people and their lives. And also, particularly, I think, in the UK, which I will just touch on for a second, is I think a lack of basic skills, which concerns me. I think that's one of the negatives which I see. People are, in a way, lacking basic numeracy and literacy skills, which I think are as important as they've always been.
Yeah, well, we couldn't agree with you more, Vicki and I. And of course, you were with us it was part of the genesis of the Be the Ultimate Assistant workshop, is that it's this has evolved into a profession of skills, and assistants. There are too many assistants who are finding themselves unemployed because they've allowed their skills to go stagnant, and that's a whole big topic that we're going to be getting to about training. But that's a great overview of what you're seeing. One of the things that you talked about in London that really stuck with me, you spoke so passionately about assistants thinking long and hard before they resign their current job. Can you tell our listeners what you mean by that, and tell us what you talked about in London?
I'm so glad you picked up on that. I think changing roles is a terribly risky thing to do, and I think a lot of assistants will give up far too easily and consider that they don't have the dream role. I think the key thing is that changing a job is a big risk, and I think you have to think very carefully about where your career is going. So let me give you an example. So an assistant who has, let's say, worked in banking or financial markets or boutique financial services such as private equity or hedge funds, I think for them to then suddenly go and work in pharmaceuticals, or suddenly go and work in healthcare or government departments, I think the narrative of their career has to be understandable. And I think a lot of documents or resumes that I receive are from people that have chopped and changed sectors and companies and organizations far too frequently. And the issue that I have is that many employers won't consider that resume because they think it's a risk, because they think the money and the time and the effort that they will invest in that person will be wasted because that person will be leaving in, let's say, 9 months, maybe a year. So I think the thing is that changing a role, if you have a manager that you are, that you have an excellent working relationship with, I think giving up a role is the easiest thing to do. And I think what I'd like assistants to consider is, what they can do for their organization first before asking what the organization can do for them. And I think a lot of people tend to move roles not so much on a whim, but perhaps on issues which are, let's say, that could be sorted out. So, for example, people perhaps a little bit unhappy about their pay or conditions, or maybe their journey to work, or maybe they've been asked to take on more responsibilities which they don't feel they're being paid for. I think a lot of issues are really communication based, and I think if they sat down with their managers and actually spoke to them about their concerns, I don't think they'd really want to move jobs. Moving jobs is a risk. You could end up working for somebody who is, a megalomaniac, somebody who you don't respect, somebody who you don't like, somebody who's a bully. And I know, Bonnie, that you really concentrate on workplace bullying, and I think it's a fantastic thing that you've done in raising awareness of that. And I think, as I say, changing roles is a risk.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I certainly talk with a lot of assistants who I agree with you that they're very quick to quit jobs when they shouldn't quit. And the key is, if you have a manager you really are simpatico with, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And we've seen it time and time again where assistants talk about risk. They take the risk to go to their manager and say, speak to the things that are difficult. We had just something really simple. An assistant was going to quit a job until we had a conversation. She was talking about her train schedule and how she had to be at work at a certain time, but if she could only take a train that was 20 minutes later, it would make everything so much easier. But she felt like she had to just quit the job because she was going to be required to come in at that particular time. And when she took the risk to have the conversation, her manager didn't want to lose her. Of course he didn't want to lose her.
You're so right. And I think what assistants need to realize is that actually most organizations hate the recruitment process because it's a risk for them too. They don't really know what they're going. They will keep a good assistant. Most organizations will keep excellent staff. They don't want to go through the process of using someone like me to go and find them somebody else, because it's not something that they enjoy. So I think if it's all about communication, I think if only people would sit down with one another and talk about these issues, I think that actually they would probably recognize that the job that they have and the manager that they have is pretty good.
Absolutely. And that leads to the next question about the soft skills, communication. You've brought it up a few times. Assistants want to make top dollar. They want to make six-figure salaries. Talk to us about the vital soft skills, the communication skills, the people skills that you believe are the most important that assistants need, Chris.
This is a really hard question because I think often what makes a world-class assistant is, je ne sais quoi. It's very, very hard to quantify. I think if I had to pin it down, I think some of the words that I would use would be excellent judgment. Somebody who can read people or read a situation, who can look at somebody's face and think, actually, that person looks a bit stressed, that person looks angry, that person looks happy. Somebody who has excellent emotional intelligence. And I mean, for world-class assistants, which I deal with, they have emotional intelligence off the scale. It's incredible that they can foresee issues and they can read situations perfectly. I think somebody who is quietly determined, somebody who doesn't seek the limelight, an assistant who is warm, who's friendly, but also someone who's very shrewd and political when required and when needed, and somebody with a bit of backbone. If you can have all of those skills, and again, you can develop them. I think that, some people are born excellent communicators. That's great. A lot of these skills you can develop, though, and I think if you can tick many of these. I think that's what I mean by soft skills, which are perfect for the assistant role.
Great. Thank you.
I agree with that. And I think that if by surrounding yourself with other assistants that you admire helps.
Yes.
So that you can kind of emulate, kind of experience what makes them a world-class assistant and emulate those skills. And, I'm not big on plugging our own training, but I'll tell you this. that in a couple things about our 2-day workshop, when you were talking about, deciding whether or not to leave a job because of a conflict or an issue or trying to find a different job, and that when people go through our 2-day workshop, one of the things, and it was kind of an unexpected outcome of the workshop, is that the assistants are experiencing what other assistants, with the partnership that they have with their executive, and walking away understanding, oh my gosh, I have the best situation, or oh my gosh, I need to work on this. Here's some ideas here. So if anyone is thinking about leaving their position because of a conflict, going through our workshop will help you identify, kind of give you more information about whether or not to make that decision. Obviously, Chris doesn't want you to make that decision to leave. The second thing about the soft skills, we've had Lauren Gelati, Bill Gates' assistant, go through our class. We've had a lot of other high-level assistants go through our class. So it's going through our class is a great way to see what these high-level assistants, the qualities that they have, and learn from them. So. Sorry about that plug, and I don't normally plug all the time, but I'm just thinking about that.
Vic, before you go on, I have a quote that I just heard last week that's so relevant to what you were just talking about, what you and Chris were just saying. Here it is. You can't be it if you can't see it. And I realized that's what happens at B2A. We're talking about role models, right? I mean, they're not only getting to learn from, Vicki and me and people like Chris Taylor, but how about one another? How about the learning that happens by getting to meet a Lauren Gelati and getting to see, oh, I get it. That's what that looks like. You can't be it if you can't see it. I just love it.
You're absolutely right. And I think the beauty of the seminars that you produce is that you can then share best practice. You can, because an assistant is a terribly lonely role in many, many, organizations. Because you are trusted with information, everything has to be kept very confidential. You are a gatekeeper, not only a gatekeeper to external audiences, but internal ones too. And it's a terribly lonely position. And I think if you can experience, and share ideas and best practice with other people from other sectors on one of your seminars, I think it does, but then you almost like having the car validated. It makes you fall in love with your job all over again, and I think that's the beauty of what you do.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. let me chime in there. Okay, so you talked about the soft skills. Now it's my turn to ask about the critical hard skills, and hard skills meaning the technology skills. What do you think assistants need as far as technology skills? You even referred to it earlier, that the technology is allowing us to be more global, and what are the requirements right now?
I think I probably widen this a little bit, and I would say that project management skills, I think, for an executive assistant or personal assistant, I think is absolutely critical, and there's a lot of training in that particular area. Hard skills, I think I would expect an assistant to have, they have to have excellent knowledge of, all the Microsoft Office applications. They should know how a Mac works. They should know how to, sync their manager's BlackBerry or whatever it is. A lot of the assistants I deal with also, particularly on the smaller firms, are updating websites, company intranets, and this sort of term tech savvy is becoming very sort of widely used. And funnily enough, I've actually used it myself in a couple of roles that I've advertised in the last year or so, where it very much is tech savvy, and people are required to understand the digital age. And I think that people's use of IT and software, and I think that their manager's expectation of what people need to be able to do is so much higher than it used to be. And I think if there's one thing that you're going to do for training for next year as an individual, and I think if you can upskill your understanding of the technology, particularly the work-based technology that's available to everybody, I think that would be incredible. It's an incredible skill to have, and increasingly it's really important.
So how do you, now I have a whole episode about my disdain for the term tech savvy. How do you find a tech savvy assistant? How do you know someone's tech savvy?
I think, well, it's difficult to, if I use the word tech savvy in a role advertisement, then I tend to get people who would then mirror that term in their opening letter to me or within their resume. So they will say, I am a tech-savvy assistant, and they will generally list a number of applications or processes or programs that they will be familiar with. I probably need to upskill in this area myself, but I think that's tend to what I get. That's what I see. So people that are using the buzzwords, and it's difficult for me to really say whether they are tech savvy or they're not. I mean, there are lots of ways of testing people, of course, and I will employ that if the client that I'm working with is absolutely 100% committed to the person being that terminology tech savvy.
I like that. That's a great suggestion. If someone does see the term tech-savvy assistant on the job posting, that in your cover letter, talk to that and be specific about your tech-savvy skills. And so, because my issue lies in that it's such a generic term, and when I see a job posting that doesn't really expand on what it is they're looking for, I think that that's a recipe for disaster. So have you seen any where it's kind of backfired because the expectation wasn't clear at the beginning, that the term tech-savvy wasn't defined, and then the assistant didn't have the tech-savvy skills that the employer wanted?
Yes, it has happened, and I think it was an assistant who was really required to update the company website. It wasn't a particularly large company, but their website was very important to them, and I think that this particular person really did struggle with updating this, and I think that she wasn't really used to filling out forms online. I think that she was fundamentally quite frightened of the internet, and I think she was frightened of doing something that would bring the whole system down, which of course, the expectation of the employer was one thing, and her skills were actually something else.
I mean,
And
it's intimidating updating a website. Because I do it, my own website, and Bonnie does her website, it's intimidating because you think like, oh my gosh, I'm going to mess this up and the whole website's going to go down.
Right.
So they could have good Excel skills and Outlook skills and technology skills, but updating a website is completely different, and it needs to be specified, and that's my point, and I see that, obviously your point too.
Yeah, but also I would say that being tech savvy is also aware of the technology that's available now. A lot of assistants that I've been speaking to, or in detail about this, would say, I manage the company's digital presence. So they are dealing with digital agencies, advertising agencies, marketing agencies, in terms of understanding pay-per-click, for example, or understanding website ranking or Google Analytics, and a lot of that is not necessarily being able to fundamentally do it yourself, but actually understanding the terminology, which I think is so important. So I think if you can understand that, you can talk coherently about those things and have some basic knowledge. That's what I would also consider as quite tech savvy. So it's not necessarily doing it, but being aware of it and being aware of what's actually available, because I think that makes you something else as an assistant, and that puts you again on another level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's also kind of like being bilingual, multilingual.
Yes.
Just being able to just understand a little bit. So you mentioned earlier you have a position right now that's a global position. Do you want to mention that?
Yes.
And how technology plays a role?
Yeah, it's a business. It's a traveling executive assistant, and the person really doesn't spend very much time in their own bed. What they're doing is they're spending 3 months of the year in Washington, 3 months of the year in Cairo, and 3 months of the year in London. The ultra-high net worth individual who they're working for travels extensively. So it's in terms of, he wants somebody who's able to ensure that his Outlook is synced to his telephone or his BlackBerry or his iPhone, and has experience of being able to use a Mac, and experience of being able to use a PC and all of the major applications. And he doesn't want someone who can't plug a laptop into a projector and a screen. He needs somebody who's confident in this and displays confidence, but also knows the right questions to ask when it does go wrong and can sort things out very, very quickly. So it does come up a lot, and increasingly I think people managers are expecting an assistant to have these skills, and they're not considered as skills which are out of the ordinary. They're considered as basic skills.
Yeah, and it should be effortless.
Yes, of course.
when you're working, whether you're working in Cairo or London or DC office, it's just it doesn't matter what device you're on. The productivity level is still as high as possible,
Absolutely.
and there are no hiccups.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's hard for an assistant to have.
Yeah.
So I see that. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a global business. It's a
Yeah.
global business. Sorry, Bonnie. It's a global business. He operates, 24 hours across multiple territories, multiple different languages. Everything has to work, and it has to work on time. And he's not going to want an assistant who can't manage this, and it's going to frustrate him if they can't.
I know that we're going to be talking about money in part 2, Chris, but because you're talking about this specific job, can you give us the ballpark of what is this very demanding, high travel position paying, please?
I think dollar equivalent about $90,000 US.
See, and that strikes me as low for something that's so demanding.
I think it is a little low, but I think they're also selling it as you get to see the world, and if you're looking to work for ultra high net worth individual and stay in the very best hotels and resorts and travel by private jet, because that's what the role is, then I think it's an experience. I'm not sure that it's a position that people would want to do for many, many years, but it's a wonderful experience. And as I say, you get to travel the world. So I would assume that that's been factored into the remuneration. But yes, it's not the biggest salary in the world.
No.
It sounds amazing, though.
Don't forget your toothbrush. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
It does, but I know that there are assistants out there thinking I would have no life. It's not really possible to have much of a personal life when you're traveling. You're 3 months here, 3 months there, 3 months there.
No, that's quite right.
Yeah, it definitely, and it probably wouldn't last for years on end. That's something that can be done temporarily. But it's an interesting point, and it'll be interesting to see how fast you can fill it, and if the money's going to have to come up for a person, who does fill the role but is requiring more money.
Yes.
All right. Well, our final questions are targeted to the employers that are out there listening, to the hiring managers, the HR departments that are listening. And so what do you wish more employers and hiring managers knew about the current job market and hiring process, or what's your best advice to them? If you could just talk to that one hiring manager, what would be your best advice or lesson?
I think a lot of assistants that I see, that I talk to, that I put forward for roles, I think the key thing that they would like is feedback on why, for example, they weren't successful. And I think it's so important to give people decent feedback, because it enables them to grow, it enables them to change their approach. And I think that it's such a shame that often I have to say, well, you weren't really the right fit. And I have to use that as a catch-all, because I've never been given, for example, some people just don't give me feedback on why that individual did not get the role. And I think if I was speaking to HR professionals or hiring managers, I think that the key thing is that that assistant has made a great deal of effort to go along to that company or that organization, and it has cost time and money, and they've taken time out of their normal day, and they may well have had to sort of tell a white lie to their existing manager as to why they're not in the office. And I think that should be respected, and I think it's hurtful to assistants that don't get that feedback. I think that's the one thing I would probably say.
Wow.
That's a good point. And I know, Bonnie, you were part of the hiring process for a few jobs over the last few years, and you had feedback for candidates, but you said you weren't going to provide the feedback unless the candidate came to you.
Yes.
Chris, would you recommend the candidate ask for feedback, or do you think that the hiring manager should just automatically provide that?
I think the hiring manager or the HR professional should always provide the feedback. Candidates always ask for the feedback, but as I say, it's very difficult to provide them detailed feedback because generally the hiring manager or the HR professional just doesn't do it. They've seen the candidate, the candidate's been and gone, they've moved on to the next one, and I think it's a right to ask for that, because how on earth can you change your approach or improve your interview technique if that feedback isn't provided? So it's a shame that people don't. provide it. But that's the market at the moment. But I think it has to change.
Yeah, I think it's also true that not everyone is open to feedback, that candidates sometimes want it, but sometimes they don't. And so to be safe, I'll say, may I be direct and honest with you about what I know. And I believe that some HR professionals and hiring managers are afraid of being sued, that some of these comments are very subjective and could open them up for litigation. And so they tread very softly. Would you think that's true also, Chris?
I think that is true, but I think that any organization or company that cares about diversity policies or inclusivity within their firm, I think they have to provide this feedback. And if the person isn't suitable because they don't have a college degree, or they weren't able to answer the questions coherently, or they turned up late, or they weren't dressed appropriately, that is still feedback, and that feedback really can't be argued with. And as I say, candidates often say, like as you've just mentioned, that they're very happy to receive the direct feedback. So that's what needs to happen. I think hiring managers need to be braver, and I think candidates need to be more accepting of the feedback that comes back, because if that is the person's opinion, that's all that matters.
Right. Perception is everything. Perception is reality, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm going to move on to the final question that we have for this part. The time has just flown. In 2016, moving forward, what we're seeing is that the idea of creating budgets to invest in the administrative staff in the form of training, of targeted training specific to the role of being an assistant, is still a fairly new idea. It's not as new an idea as it was, say, 3 years ago when Vicki and I were actively climbing the mountain of trying to raise awareness about the need for this. It's not quite as unknown now as it was then, but it's still a fairly new idea among companies. What do you think about this in terms of training assistants out there?
Well, I think training is vital, but I think what you do and what Vicki does in terms of be the ultimate assistant, I think you offer much more than just training. I think it's about a mindset to continuously strive for improvement, as opposed to single interventions. So I think what you're doing is showing and coaching people for excellence, and I think that's what it is. I think one-off training events, they're very useful, they have their place, but I think what you have done in terms of creating this mindset and this environment is much more important. And I think that if assistants can get that and can attend your workshops and your seminars, that is what's required. And I think, for example, what we're doing today is perfect for people continuously improving their performance. I don't think excellent EAs, they don't wait for training to come along. They go out and find it. And I think that's the difference.
Right.
And I'll add to that, too, is that a lot of the top-level assistants are organizing training for their teams. They're not waiting around for training to show up at their doorstep for the entire team. They're like, you know what? We want to train all of the assistants, whether it's in their immediate department or all over the world in various departments, that they're taking a lead role, which is really impressive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for your comments about BTUA, Chris. It means a great deal. We feel like we've been pioneers, that we've been treading this new territory because it's, as you say, it's not only about specific skills. It is about a mindset, an attitude about being excellent, not on just some days, but every day. When you want to work at the highest levels, that's the kind of attitude that's needed. So I'd like to end this episode with a thought and a lesson that I've come to after the 25 years working with Olympia Dukakis in this dream job. And what I came to is that assistants have a very easy time of thinking of themselves as in support of, that you're assisting someone. That's the definition. But what's also true, and what you just said, Chris, is that assistants are leaders. In the workplace and in the job market of 2016, those assistants who are going to succeed at the highest levels are also leaders, and we cannot underestimate your power and your influence in the workplace. That it's very much about being a strategic business partner. That the old idea, the old paradigm of the secretary and the assistant, those days really are over. And that's what's so exciting, is that there really has never been a better time to be an assistant than right now. But we're in a very volatile time right now. There's a lot of movement. But what I want to leave our listeners with, and Chris, I want to hear your final thoughts, but is that times of change are times of opportunity. So do not underestimate your power and influence in this role, because when you exert it, you're going to be seen as a leader and are going to be able to command the top dollar of making the six figures. What do you think, Chris?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that what I would say is that, the financial crash in a way has been a boon to being an executive assistant. It's been a positive thing. A lot of guys and girls that worked as bankers and Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns or whatever, they came out of those businesses looking for a job, and those people have created wonderful organizations that are small, that are niche, that are very responsive, and they require excellent, world-class executive assistants. You're right, there has never been a better time to be an assistant, because the opportunity and this digital world that we're all in, I think, has thrown out so many opportunities, and this is why assistants must take this very, very seriously going forward.
Thank you so much, Chris. So tell our listeners how they can stay in touch with you and how they can reach out to you.
Okay, that's really kind. My website is www.christophertaylораssociates.co.uk. My personal mobile I'm happy to share, which is 0044 7834620040. And again, my email address is ctaylor@ctaylorassociates.co.uk.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Wow, this episode was chock filled with great information. In part 2, we're going to be going on to dealing with the nuts and bolts of the job search in 2016, talking about the specifics of the CV, and we're going to talk money. We're going to talk about real life situations about what amount of money you can expect to earn as an assistant in 2016.
Yeah, it's going to be very tactical, so be sure to listen to part 2 of this episode. So that concludes today's episode. We'd love your feedback, topic ideas, and questions. Visit the podcast page at betheultimateassistant.com. Thank you once again to our guest, Chris Taylor, and to you for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye, Bonnie.
Bye, Vicki. Bye, Chris.
Thanks, bye. Bye.